For years, I thought being reliable was enough. I showed up every single day. I handled the bills, the kids' school runs, the forgotten grocery lists, the late-night emergencies. I wasn't loud, I wasn't dramatic. I just did what needed to be done. I thought that was love. I thought consistency meant value. But somewhere along the way, I became invisible. My opinions turned into background noise. My presence became routine like furniture, useful but unnoticed. My partner's eyes used to light up when I entered the room. Now they barely flickered. I told myself it was just a phase, that maybe work stress or life's weight had dulled the warmth between us. But deep down I knew I was no longer respected. I had become the person everyone depended on but no one appreciated. The moment that broke me wasn't explosive. It was quiet and humiliating. We were at a small gathering with friends. My partner was telling a story, one that I had lived through, one where I had done most of the heavy lifting. Yet somehow, I was edited out. When I tried to interject, they waved me off with a laugh and said, "You wouldn't understand, you're not the decision maker here." Everyone laughed. I did too, but something inside me cracked. That night, while everyone slept, I sat in the living room staring at the dark. I realized I had built a life where I didn't matter. I was the foundation of a house that everyone walked over. That was the moment I decided I would never feel that small again. I didn't pack a bag that night. I didn't storm out or make a scene. That would have been impulsive, emotional. No. I was going to leave strategically, quietly, on my terms. I vowed to build my exit carefully, like an architect designing freedom. If I was going to reclaim my dignity, it wouldn't be through shouting matches or revenge. It would be through control, the one thing I had always given up too easily. That night, I made a silent promise. I will leave, but this time I will do it right. The hardest part was the guilt, my children, my reason for staying so long. I thought about their faces, their laughter, their little footsteps down the hallway. Could I really walk away from that? But then I realized something painful. Staying wasn't teaching them love, it was teaching them endurance. They were learning that being mistreated was normal, that silence was love, that self-sacrifice was virtue. No, leaving wasn't abandonment. It was a lesson in self-respect. So I decided I would leave not out of anger but out of necessity. And as I sat there in that silent house, with the sound of their soft breathing in the next room, I whispered to myself, one day, they'll understand. One day, they'll see that sometimes walking away is the most courageous way to love yourself. Once the decision settled inside me, something shifted. My emotions cooled, my mind sharpened. I had spent years solving everyone else's problems. Now I turned that precision inward. I started small, a new email, a second phone number, a private bank account under a name only I could trace. I told myself it was just in case, but deep down I knew it was my escape route. My professional skills became my armor. I understood systems, paperwork, fine print, the small details most people ignored. So I built quietly. One signature, one hidden document, one redirected payment at a time. I didn't rush. I planned like someone who had learned patience through pain. Every dollar saved was a brick in the wall between my old life and my new one. I began studying everything: property laws, asset control, contractual loopholes. I realized how blind trust had cost me power in my own home, so I started embedding protections, subtle, invisible, untraceable. Whenever my partner needed help with paperwork, I was there, calm, efficient, supportive. But behind my quiet demeanor was strategy. Each document I touched carried my fingerprints, a clause here, a lien there, safeguards that turned my invisibility into control. I didn't do it to punish. I did it to protect, to make sure that when I walked away, my years of effort wouldn't vanish into someone else's carelessness. It was strange, the same habits that once made me feel unappreciated were now my greatest strength. Months passed. My plan took form like a sculpture carved out of silence. I secured a small cabin 2 towns away, in cash, under an LLC. I found a used car registered under that same company. Every move was discreet, clean, legal. Then came the hardest night, my last one under that roof. I walked quietly into my children's room, watching them sleep. Their faces were peaceful, untouched by the tension that had filled our home. I wanted to hold them, to whisper goodbye, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I brushed my fingers across their hair and whispered softly, "One day, you'll understand." It wasn't a goodbye of escape. It was a goodbye of rebirth. At dawn, I left. No letter, no explanation, no trace. Just a home filled with echoes of the life I once lived. I left everything behind. The house, the accounts, the memories. Because freedom, I realized, wasn't about keeping what you had. It was about no longer being owned by it. As I drove away, the sun broke over the horizon. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt still. A kind of peace I hadn't known in years. For the first time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was sacred. That was the morning I became a ghost, and the day I finally began to live. It took 3 days before my phone started ringing nonstop. Then came the messages, the voicemails, the emails, all filled with shock, anger, disbelief. At first, I didn't respond. I just watched from a distance. I imagined my partner pacing the house, calling mutual friends, checking hospitals, asking questions that no one could answer. In their mind, this was temporary. A tantrum, a midlife breakdown. They believed I'd come crawling back once the silence sank in, but they didn't realize. This silence was my freedom. I wasn't lost. I was found. Weeks later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my partner had tried to sell one of our properties. I knew the exact day it would happen. I had prepared for it. The moment they signed the sales agreement, the hidden clause activated, a lien I had legally filed months earlier, under an anonymous holding company. Without my consent, no transaction could be completed. The shock must have been priceless. For years I had been dismissed as the quiet one, the helper, the background. And now that very quietness had become their undoing. Suddenly everything they thought they controlled wasn't really theirs. They didn't know it yet, but every asset had a string attached. And I held all of them. When anger replaced confusion, the lawyers came. They dug, searched, and questioned, but every trail they followed led to a locked door. Every legal loophole was already sealed. I had spent years feeling small, but when you've lived in someone's shadow long enough, you learn to study the light. I had used that time to master the rules, and now I was playing the game better than they ever did. The lawyers eventually gave up. There was nothing to challenge. Everything I did was legitimate, ironclad, perfectly legal. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was in control. I started over quietly, in a small coastal town where no one knew my name. I opened a modest repair shop under the LLC I'd built years before. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. Every customer, every receipt, every late-night hour spent working. It was proof that I could build something from nothing. Sometimes, at closing time, I'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset reflect off the sea. I'd think about how far I'd come, from being invisible to being unseen by choice. I didn't miss the noise. I didn't crave recognition. All I wanted was peace, and I finally had it. One evening, a man walked into my shop. Quiet, older, the kind of person whose silence speaks louder than his words. He didn't come for a repair, he came for conversation. He'd heard whispers about me, the man who vanished and rebuilt himself from scratch. Somehow, he knew. Over coffee he told me his own story, a different version of the same pain. A controlling marriage, a long escape, the guilt that lingered like a ghost even after freedom. He said something I never forgot. Freedom isn't just leaving what broke you, it's refusing to let guilt pull you back. He became my mentor, not in business, but in peace. He taught me to separate compassion from weakness, to help without surrendering, to forgive without returning. And for the first time, I began to understand that true transformation isn't about disappearing. It's about redefining who you are when no one is watching. Months later, the past found me. A private investigator showed up at my shop one afternoon. He didn't need to ask questions. He already knew who I was. He wasn't there to threaten me, just to deliver a message. My former partner wanted closure, or maybe control. I looked him in the eye and said calmly, "Tell them I'm alive, I'm safe, and I don't hate them, but I won't come back." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You've changed," he said. I smiled faintly. "No," I replied, "I just stopped pretending. He left quietly. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear that someone had found me. I felt peace that I no longer had to hide. Months later, I heard through quiet channels that my former partner had fallen ill. Financially, things had also crumbled. The assets were frozen. The house was nearly gone. I sat for a long time staring at the bank transfer screen. My hands hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to say it wasn't my problem anymore. But another part remembered that love, even when broken, leaves an imprint. So I sent help. Not enough to fix everything, just enough to steady them. I did it anonymously, through the same quiet structures that had once set me free. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't pity. It was closure, the final act of a person who had made peace with his past. Years passed. I stayed in touch with my children from a distance. Small messages, gifts, letters without return addresses. I watched from afar as they grew, each finding their path. At first they didn't understand. They were angry, confused, but slowly, as they matured, they began to see what I couldn't explain when they were young. That sometimes leaving isn't running away. It's choosing to live truthfully. One day, my eldest sent me a message through a mutual friend. I think I understand now. You didn't leave us, you just stopped disappearing in your own home. I sat there for a long time reading that line over and over, tears in my eyes, pride in my heart. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt seen, even from miles away. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. The anger, the fear, the guilt. They all faded into quiet understanding. Years later, I found myself standing at the back of a crowded auditorium. My daughter was on stage, cap and gown shimmering under the lights. Graduation day. I hadn't been invited. I didn't expect to be. But watching her from the shadows, I didn't feel excluded. I felt grateful. Grateful that she'd made it, that she'd grown strong, confident, unbroken. When they called her name, I clapped softly to myself. No one noticed me, and for once, I was okay with that. Because invisibility, when chosen, feels like peace. After the ceremony, I was about to leave when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Dad? I froze. Slowly, I turned around, and there she was, older, wiser, her eyes reflecting both recognition and forgiveness. We stood there for a moment, silence doing all the speaking. Then she said, I always wondered if I'd see you again. I never stopped watching, I said quietly. She smiled through tears. I used to hate you for leaving, but now, I get it. You didn't leave us, you left the pain. Those words broke me, not in sorrow but in healing. We talked for a few minutes, nothing deep, nothing heavy, just enough to feel human again. Before she left, she hugged me and whispered, I'm proud of you. For the first time in years, I let myself cry. Later, I learned that my former partner had changed too. Time and loss had humbled them. They'd gone through therapy, rebuilt from nothing, and found a quieter